At this time, hearing the words of the Good Shepherd, I've asked Pastor Franklin Walden, a pastor of Vision Church in Valdosta, who had a mentee relationship with my father, to say a few words.
Brother White was there for me when I went through two of the hardest things I could ever face. Him and my father were friends long before I was ever born, and when my father died, he took me in as a son. And we spent a lot of time together, and I can honestly say that I am the pastor today that I am because of Brother White. The way I think about ministry, the way I care for people, he taught me so much. And he spoke words to me that encouraged me, even when the times were tough, and even when I didn't understand why things would happen certain ways. We would go to ball games, and spring training was one of the things that we really enjoyed going to. And we would have long conversations on the way to middle of Florida. He liked going to see the Tigers down in Lakeland. And we would have long conversations on just things that we face. And I was so encouraged to see somebody that had experienced so much life, that he stood strong in his faith. And even in hard times, he would always speak positive things and encouraging words. And I'm so thankful, because when I got to the church that I have now, I'm in the building that he built. And every time that I stand there on a Sunday morning, I'm thinking about how many messages he spoke there, and how to carry on a legacy that he started in that place. And so I want to tell you today that the impact of someone like Brother White goes on generation after generation. I was talking to my daughters, and he meant a lot to them. And I'm so thankful, because I know that he carried such an anointing on his life that I talked to people throughout Valdosta that knew him when he was the pastor of Evangel. And they think very highly of him. And they speak so much nice things, and so many just amazing testimonies after testimony of how he saved somebody's marriage, or prayed for somebody that was sick and they got healed, and it goes on and on. But I was thinking about the day before he passed. We were supposed to go see him, and we got back from another trip, and I was thinking, okay, well, maybe we can go another time. And I was thinking how much I wished that I could have seen him one more time. But then I was thinking, you know what? I wouldn't trade anything for what he's experiencing now. Because he stepped into everything that he preached. Everything that he stood for, he's experiencing now. And I thought about him seeing Miss Ann and how joyful their reunion must have been. And then I thought about him and my dad catching up after many, many years. What that must have been like. And I'm so thankful that God allowed Brother White to be a part of my life. And I want to share with you what my dad wrote many years ago. Something that always gives me hope. And these are the words that come to my mind when Michael let me know that Brother White had passed. It goes like this: goodbye is not forever, just a while and a span. Jesus will soon be coming, and we'll be together again. We'll meet on hills of glory with heaven's angel band. Goodbye is not forever, we'll be together again. Yes, we'll be together again in that land we'll never grow old. We'll live in that bright city, and we'll walk on streets of pure gold. There'll be no sorrows there, nor tears to dim the eye. We'll live together forever and never say goodbye. But until that day, those who've gone on will live in our memory till God calls us home. As we stand on God's promises till that glorious day when Jesus shall return to call us all away. Yes, we'll be together again in that land we'll never grow old. We'll live in that bright city, and we'll walk on streets of pure gold. There'll be no sorrows there, nor tears to dim the eye. We'll live together forever and never say goodbye. And that is my hope, because I can't wait till I cross over and see one of the greatest mentors that I can ever have. Thank you for sharing him with me.
Thank you again for gathering in this moment of remembrance, of celebration, of mourning, of giving thanks, but also of blessing Jimmy White for this new chapter, this new journey with all the saints who've come before. I do want to make sure to not miss the opportunity to point out that Skylar's sister Sarah in Texas sent her greeting and prayers and love for everyone this morning. She could not join us, and my Uncle Matthew, who is my mom's much younger brother, who grew up here as well. His companion Larry, spouse, has early dementia and was not able to travel, and so he sends his love. But that's why our nephew, from my wife's side, Isaiah Ives, is sharing this so that others who could not be here can partake in this sacred moment that we share. I do want to take this chance to give thanks. I won't go through my father's biography, but I do want to take an opportunity to name that all of us are here because in some way he touched us. And in some way, maybe it was a relationship, and it might have been my mom who grew up here as well, but something brings us here for this moment of love and celebration and remembrance. And thank you for sharing in this time. I want to particularly give thanks that 3 years ago we were here, right out here for my mother's burial, and I really thought that because of their lifelong journey together, that as soon as she died, he would go quickly. But he rallied, and he moved to Savannah and really had a renaissance and lived fully to the very end at 92. My son said, "It's strange when you're totally blown away that a 92-year-old died." But he was still going to church, and he had been to a few concerts in the last few weeks, and had Christmas with us, and it was exactly what he wanted. He was living, and then he was living on the other side. But just want to highlight that, I think, Thanksgiving. And I also want to share why, people that know my father from Valdosta, from Savannah, often say, "Why are you going to Graceville, Florida?" This church was founded in 1922, and it was founded by my grandmother's parents as founding members, our parents, the Taylors, and her father's brother, R.E. Taylor, was the first Pentecostal preacher in this area and traveled around with Pentecostal revivals in the earliest moments of that movement. And so when this church was founded, it was the only Pentecostal church around, and a lot of people came through here. And my grandmother grew up here and is buried here, as is her mother, as is her grandmother, and they're all right here. And each of those generations have siblings and cousins that are also here. But through that, my mother grew up here in this church, and then my uncle, her 18-year younger brother, grew up here in this church. And my grandmother her mother was the secretary of the church from those earliest days of 1922. But the word secretary is not what we think of as an office helper. It was the registrar, the keeper of the records and the rolls and the memberships and the baptisms and the services of worship. And after my great-grandmother died, my grandmother took that role and did it for 20 years. And during that time, she had an inside track to a few pastors she knew when they were looking for pastors. And their daughter, my mother, Ann, had attended Southeastern Bible College in Lakeland, Florida, which is why my father liked to go back to Lakeland to see the Detroit team that he used to see back in college at spring training in Lakeland, Florida. But my grandmother and some other people said, well, Ann's husband's a preacher, maybe he'll come. And so in the 50s, my father and mother moved here as a married couple, and my father was the pastor here for a little over a year until he was hired to be the youth director for the district of the Assemblies of God. And one of the things that this church helped propagate, really, by being such an early Pentecostal church, is there are more Assemblies of God churches in this part of the world than you'll see any other area. If you drove here, you probably passed a few. My father moved from here to work for the district of the Assemblies of God, and then there was a different pastor. And then when that pastor left, they said, "Hey, wait, Jimmy's father, he's a preacher too." And so my grandfather moved here and pastored this church, and they all lived in the rectory right across the street. And my sons found a book about the history of this church, and one of the things it said that no preacher ever made a lot of money, but the parsonage came with a big freezer. And then all the members who had farms all around, as my grandfather was one of those farmers, and his farm was, the field you see right here was not his, but just the other side of it was his farm. The book says that this freezer was always stocked with whatever vegetables were coming in, were frozen and put in, and whatever meat people had, they would just drop it off. And it says in the book that the freezer belonged to the church, not the pastor. And so people could come anytime to put stuff in that freezer. But my grandfather then was pastoring here, and his daughter Betty, who's here with us with her children and in-laws, Betty and her parents were here. And Betty was in high school here as the pastor's daughter, and met a Graceville boy, Tommy Franklin, and they married right after high school, and he just died this past spring, and they had a full life together that started really from that time here in Graceville. And my uncle, who's an amazing musician, this is where he first played music. This is where my mom, who's a musician, first played music, and you can see that has continued through the genes that we're blessed by this day. But I do want to also highlight the fact that my older brother, Stan, who's no longer living, my grandparents still lived here while he was old enough to come and have experiences. But by the time I was 2, they moved from here to Weewa Hitchika. And people in Graceville know what that means, but when I say that to people in Virginia or North Carolina, wherever, they have no idea what I'm saying. But they moved there and had a fish camp on Dead Lakes. And that was my grandfather's dream life. And they were here and had the farm, but then they opened Ward's grocery store in town and eventually moved into town where they lived just a few blocks away from my mother-in-law, who grew up here at McCrae, growing up here as part of the McCrae family. And then in Washington, D.C., when I met a young woman, she said her mother's name was Margaret McCrae originally, now Margaret Slingleff. And I asked my mother, do you know Margaret McCrae? And all of those connections of Graceville came pouring in, and our uncles and aunts knew one another, and our grandparents knew one another. And so all roads lead to Graceville. And on my side, they all come through New Hope Church here. And one thing you would not know, it's fun to have sons who are historians that research these things that I can share. But even though this is a smaller building, so many people have come through this church over the years that the records in the 50s, when both my father and grandfather were the pastors here, there was always over 100 in Sunday school, in addition to the people that would show up for worship here. And on one of the traditions of churches like this, many of you know, is homecoming. And people who've been a part of the church at some point and moved to other places come home. And they found that at one of those homecomings that involved Sunday school and worship and dinner on the ground and a number of things, had over 500 people gathered here. And I've seen some pictures of those homecomings that had just cars everywhere in this area. So thank you for driving from all over and flying. A number of people who've flown even to be here to meet here at New Hope Assembly of God in Graceville, Florida, where many of you probably did not even know we had a connection to, unless you have been in this particular area. But in this space where my grandparents and great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents even are, not to mention aunts and uncles and cousins, and my father will be placed in just a few moments right there. His urn is already placed in the ground, and we will journey out together in just a moment after a song and have our final prayers. And I'll say more about that as we make that journey. But for me and my father and my mother, this really is holy ground. And the idea of the flame of fire that has come through this place, this is holy ground.